Okay, here we are. I'm going to show you the making process of the oatmeal buttermilk sandwich loaf. I have my buttermilk already pre-weighed, 250 grams, and pre-warmed a little bit in the microwave, just enough to take the chill off. 20 seconds maybe. Now I've added my starter. I added about 80 grams of starter. And this is where the video gets interesting because for some reason, now my 2 eggs, for some reason it decides to go into slow motion. I don't know what I did, so I did a lot of editing on this, but here's my 2 eggs. And I'm just gonna mix that in all together. This is where it interestingly starts somewhere in here. It starts going in slow motion. Anyway, this is after mixing it all up. Now I'm slow motioning the flour in there. Kind of cool, actually. But 500 grams of flour going into that, 250 buttermilk and 2 eggs and 80 grams of starter. Now I'm going to put in my 10 grams of salt and then I have my 40 grams of sugar. This step you can omit if you don't want sugar in your bread, or you can use honey. It's just something my husband likes, so I add it. Now I'm coming in with my oats. It's supposed to be 50 grams of oats. There's not 50 grams in that little container. I had to add more, but I edited that out. Now we have your 60 grams of butter. Here's an interesting mistake. I hadn't tared out my scale. I almost lifted that butter out of there, but I just thought, well, I can just wing it a little bit. But 60 grams of room temperature butter. Now you're going to just squeeze that butter in there and just take your time, slowly kind of mix this up. Takes a little bit of time, but patience, patience, patience. So I had it to this point, and this is the part of the recipe that I can't predict. The size of your eggs depends on how moist the dough is going to be. So right here I just added about 10 grams of water. It just felt too dry to me, so I added some water. All your eggs are going to be different sizes, so that's where it gets hard to make the recipe like exact. But once it's to the consistency that you like, just don't be afraid of adding a little water, but do it right then, not later. Can't do it later. So here I am just finishing up, and that is the first step. This is part 1 of making the oatmeal buttermilk loaf. So the oatmeal buttermilk loaf has rested for an hour, and now I'm going in with the first set of stretch and folds. This is the one where it's 25 to 30 folds. I've cut some out here just to save time, but you just get that all folded in for the first round. After another 30 minutes, here's the second round. You can already see the dough has more gluten strength. It's not as crumbly. It looks a little smoother. It's a tight dough though. It's not got a lot of give to it. And once it starts resisting and pulling back, that's when I stop. About 6 or 7 folds. This is the third set, the final set, And again, you see there's not much stretch in this dough, so just go around till it resists you, and now we're just ready to wait for the proof, 8 to 10 hours. So now we're on to the third, final step of the sandwich loaf, which is the shaping. I'm going to take the dough out of the bowl here, flour the surface of the counter so it doesn't stick when we roll it. I get a little too much flour. Really don't need that much flour, but so you empty it out onto the counter, and you're also gonna flour the top of your dough so that when you're rolling it with the rolling pin, it doesn't stick. So I'm gonna lightly flour the top, shape it into a light rectangle, and then start rolling with my rolling pin. Don't worry if you squeeze out a few bubbles, they will all come back. This gives you a nice even crumb in the sandwich loaf without any giant, huge air hole bubbles where your butter will fall through. I spray with a little water to help these layers stick together without, again, forming bubbles. If it gets too long, I fold in the sides. I want to keep this about the length of my loaf pan. So I occasionally just sort of crunch in the sides, fold them in. I'm going to go for my seam here. I'm going to spray the top where the seam's going to go with a little water to help it stick. And then I'm going to pinch it up, hopefully to keep that seam closed. And seam goes down in your loaf pan, seam side down. So I'm going to roll this over and get ready to apply our oats to the top of the loaf. So I have a plate full of oats. I'm just going to lightly spray the top of the loaf with the water again. Such a handy little tool, the spray bottle. If you don't have one, you should get one. I use it for multiple different things, but if you're putting everything spice or anything on your loaf, you can use the water to help it stick. So now I'm just going to roll this in the oats, get my loaf pan out, and it's ready. It's buttered. I'm going to plop that seam side down into the loaf pan. Now this will have to rise up another 2 to 3 hours before it's ready to bake. But here is the risen version. You see it's not quite to the top, but you bake at 375 for 50 minutes. I tented about halfway through, and it smelled so good, and it's just such a lovely loaf to eat. My husband couldn't wait to break into this loaf. He was asking, "Is this for us? Is this for us?" So there's your finished loaf, 375 for 50 minutes, tenting halfway through. And you're left with a lovely sandwich loaf.